All right, everybody. My name is Benjamin, and welcome to this Wednesday edition of a 2020 discussion where Joe Biden has announced his vice presidential nominee in Kamala Harris. And I honestly think this was the most underwhelming pick he could have made. Not necessarily underwhelming, probably the worst pick he could have made given his criteria. And honestly, I'm not a big fan of the criteria he chose because he decided that he was basically picking based off of identity and not qualifications. Now, and I felt that limited unnecessarily his options for vice president. So, yeah. Kamala Harris has a lot of problems, in my opinion, for a potential vice presidential candidate. Number one, her record as a prosecutor, and I'm not going to say anything about how she got her career going in the district attorney's office. But let's just say that she was able to handle the workload. Anyway, so moving on to some of the other problems. She basically spent her career locking up young black men and pushing for the harshest punishment she could get. Now, you could say that's all part of her job as a prosecutor and as a district attorney and as an attorney general, but not really. As a prosecutor and as a district attorney, you do have a lot of leeway to push for lighter sentences if you think that the maximum sentences are, cruel and unusual or not necessary in each and every case. You have a lot of leeway to interpret what's even worth prosecuting. For example, here in Virginia, down in Roanoke, the Commonwealth attorney, I think the district prosecutor, refuses to push for capital punishment even in crimes where it probably may even be warranted. He refuses to push for them because he does not believe in capital punishment and considers it cruel and unusual punishment. So she had the opportunity to say, well, this crime really shouldn't be punished to this level, which would help her with progressives for sure. Probably wouldn't help her with Republicans, but at the same time, Republicans were never going to support her anyway. In addition, she has some ties to some rather large financial institutions. And I just don't really see the logic behind this pick other than saying, hey, let's smooth over some of the tensions we had during the primary. Because if we all remember, Kamala Harris did go after Biden hard for some of his past connections to segregationists, which may run a lot deeper than I think we expected or even thought back then. So, yeah. This is kind of a weird Bedfellows situation with regards to a ticket that I've seen in a long time. Because you can go back and you say, okay, that makes sense. Those picks make sense. For example, Romney Ryan, that made a lot of sense in some regards. Obama Biden, that made a lot of sense. Trump Pence, that makes sense when you think about it. McCain-Palin is a little bit strange, but at the time the pick kind of made sense. You go back a little bit further, Bush and Cheney, yeah, that's reasonable. I think it was Kerry Edwards. Yeah, it was Kerry Edwards. That had some sense to it. Gore and Lieberman made sense. I think it was Dole, and I forget who the vice presidential pick was, but it was a no name and kind of just made sense. Clinton Gore, I think it was too Southern, but it worked because of stuff. Bush Quayle was a bit strange, but okay, fine. Reagan Bush made all the sense in the world. Was it? I forget who the vice president. Benson, Dukakis Benson, and then you go down and it was Mondale Ferraro was, in my opinion, probably the last time I've seen such a. I didn't see it in person, obviously, but if you go back into history, it's certainly one of the stranger vice presidential picks you would have seen, because Ferraro was not a national figure. Every other person I've talked to at least had some national clout. Ferraro didn't. But this is a strange combination to me, because the Democrats are hoping to, I don't know, get the progressive vote with a non-white woman. And there's a reason why I refuse to use the term person of color. And that has a lot to do with the fact that I'm a Southerner. And I think it's too close to the Jim Crow terminology for a non-white person. And when I say that, remember back in the Jim Crow South, it was colored was the term, or the slur. But all of a sudden, person of color is considered acceptable now? Yeah, sure. That's worthy. That's worthy of a drink. But the problem is, Kamala Harris her record is not something that the progressives, that SJWs are going to be proud of. There's a reason why progressives didn't flock to her when she had all the news and the headlines for taking on Biden. In addition, there's a reason why black voters didn't vote for her. Because her career was built off of incarcerating young black men. And then she goes, I think it was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and says, oh yeah, I'm totally with the hip young black crowd, I listen to Tupac and Biggie, and no. The only reason she appeals, in my opinion, has any appeal to the black community is because she herself is black. And see, I don't like talking identity politics because I really wish it weren't a thing. I don't think people should be voting based off of the color of their skin, their religion, their sexuality, their gender. They should be voting based off of the issues and where they stand on the issues. And unfortunately, we live in a world where our debates and our discussions about politics are shortened into tiny little sound bites and one-liners. Sure, they make for great meme material, but they don't make for good discussion, good analysis, nor do they lead to good, competent leadership. If that was the case, you'd have, your Lincoln Chafees, your Tim Ryans, your Rob Portmans being the rising stars of the Democrats. And on the Republican side, you'd have your Tim Scotts, your Rand Pauls, to a degree, Mia Love. I like what I've heard out of Cornyn. I like what I've heard out of Rubio, minus the part where he gets a bit robotic. Before he became an independent, then a libertarian, I really liked what I heard out of Justin Amash. Ben Sass makes a lot of sense, stuff like that. But unfortunately, we live in a time where we don't have the ability, or more accurately, we've been coached through the ever advancing progress of technology to have a very short attention span. And of course, everybody's been diagnosed with ADD, ADHD, and we just accept that at face value. And so our discussion is broken down into, sound bites, memes, jokes, one-liners that don't convey anything important, and complex governing ideas get distilled down to Orange Man bad or Biden senile. And that's one of the reasons why I'm trying to fight against this, and why I tend to go more in depth than maybe I should. But, of course, the other thing is Kamala Harris is going to be a very big talking point among conservatives. Because, as you can see from the little blurb right there on the middle of the screen, Harris had pressed Kavanaugh about sexual misconduct allegations leveled at him dating back to high school and college, when there was no definitive proof whatsoever, at least beyond the shadow of a reasonable doubt, that he had done anything wrong. It was Kavanaugh's word versus, I think it was, I forget the first part of it, but Ford was the second part of her hyphenated name. It was one person's word against another person's word. And in those cases, you have to assume not guilty, because that is how our legal system works. And you would expect a prosecutor to understand how our legal system works, that a person is innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Unfortunately, she judged him guilty the second she heard the accusations. And tell me, is that what you want becoming president? Because Biden's not going to make it through 2 terms, Jack. Corn Pop's going to make sure of that. Jesus Christ, I'm devolving into the same memes that I'm making fun of. Fantastic. Anyway, the point is that Biden maybe was forced to make a certain vice presidential pick. I think the establishment wanted Kamala Harris all along, not Biden, because Biden is senile and old, and if it weren't for the pandemic, would probably be underwater against Trump right now, along with the protests, the riots, the nonsense. I think that's because Biden is just, he's nothing special, but he also has this uncanny ability to shoot himself in the foot whenever he opens his mouth, and it's been getting worse and worse for decades. Back in the 80s, they were just amusing gaffes, and believe it or not, he was making hilarious gaffes even back then when he was young. But as time has gone on, it's kind of gotten sad to the point where I almost feel sorry for him. I remember the other day when he said that Latinos have diversity of thought unlike black people. Yeah, Yeah. So this is basically just the establishment's way of getting Kamala Harris to become president, which would be a schlong time coming. I'm going to let that one sit there for a little bit. And yeah, I think there were better choices for Biden available who had experience. If you wanted to pick a non-white woman and wanted relevant experience, he should have gone with Hirono from Hawaii. You can't really make too many bad accusations against her, nor can you criticize her record from anything other than a political standpoint, which is going to be subjective by nature. Sure, you can have all the facts and figures and whatever behind you to show that the further left you go, the less successful economically your country is. People on the left are going to say, well, that's just not true. And I would point to basically the fact that there's still massive wealth gaps in the Nordic nations under the Nordic model, that social and socioeconomic mobility in the Nordic nations is no greater than the United States, and that if you go any further to the economic left than that, your nation turns into a despotic, pardon the language, but shithole. Think the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, or the CCP, aka China, or the USSR, especially Stalin, stuff like that. Now, that's not to say that there aren't right-wing dictators who have existed, and extreme capitalist dictators who have existed, who have made their nations nightmares, shitholes. Augusto Pinochet comes to mind immediately. You could argue Batista in Cuba, but, the point remains that it's more likely that a capitalist nation is going to succeed than a socialist or communist state. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It's not purely economic, okay? It really isn't. And I don't want to make it seem like that. Because capitalist nations can fail. They absolutely can fail, okay? And it's just they don't fail as often. And here's the funny thing, is that the Nordic model nations call themselves capitalist. They call themselves social democracies. Basically, they have capitalism, but they have expansive social safety nets. And a lot of welfare. I think it was in Denmark, they had a 180% tax on cars. Basically, if you wanted to buy a car, triple the sticker price. Yeah, that's how they fund their stuff. You can't do that here in America because guess what? Most of us live a couple miles from, actually further than that, most of us live 4 or 5 miles from where we go to school or work or whatever. Assuming I get the job assuming I get my dream job in the real world, I would likely be living 10 or 12 miles. Back in the old school days, back when bikes were the fastest thing you get without having a horse, that was a day's journey. Yet here in America, the average commute is something like 15 or 20 miles. A car is required here in America. So if you want to fund the social programs that Kamala Harris would implement on behest of the the few establishment Dems who would throw a bone to the progressives, you're looking at massive taxes on things that truly are necessities. And here's the thing, she doesn't want to help the black community in an area where they probably do need the help, and that's in sin taxes, basically taxes on alcohol, tobacco, gas, basically anything that the government deems as bad for you. Gambling is another one. Black people participate in those three activities much more than any other demographic. So if you really want to help the black community out, get rid of sin taxes. Same thing with poor community, actually. Which, by the way, are very different things. Hence why I separated them. You get rid of sin taxes, you might actually see socioeconomic movement increase. But then again, I'm a libertarian. I hate taxes. I think they should all be disappeared. And people are going to call me crazy, whatever I say. So I'm going to go ahead and end it here. I hope you all have a very nice evening. I'll see you all next time. As always, likes, comments, subscriptions always help. I do have a Twitter. It's Ben's Election Forecasting. I forget what the actual @ is. I have a Patreon down in the comments. And on Friday, I do intend to compare and contrast my model to the 538 model, because 538 has finally released theirs. Anyway, take it easy, y'all. Good night.